the bitter morning of March the 9th, 1939, a 17-year-old mathematics student named Mavis Batey sat in a Cambridge lecture hall, unaware that within months she would help alter the course of human history. While most teenagers worried about examinations and weekend dances, Mavis would soon find herself holding secrets that could save or doom thousands of lives with a single miscalculation. The world was unraveling. Adolf Hitler had already swallowed Austria and Czechoslovakia whole. Britain's Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain clung desperately to his policy of appeasement. Even as German factories churned out Panzer tanks and Messerschmitt fighters at a terrifying pace. Across the Channel, French generals confidently inspected the Maginot Line, convinced their concrete fortress would hold back any invasion. They were wrong about almost everything. But in a Victorian mansion 50 miles north of London, a different kind of war was already being waged. The estate was called Bletchley Park, and most Britons had never heard of it. Those who worked there could never speak of what they did, not to their families, not to their closest friends. Not even decades after the guns fell silent, the Official Secrets Act bound them to silence as surely as iron chains. Mavis Batey, born Mavis Lever, arrived at Bletchley Park in 1940. She had been recruited not through military channels but through an academic network so discreet it barely existed on paper. Her German literature professor at University College London had quietly suggested she might be suitable for important government work. There was no formal interview, no written examination, just a brief conversation, a train ticket, and instructions to tell no one where she was going. The mansion itself seemed plucked from a Gothic novel. Sprawling lawns surrounded the main house, but these were now being carved up to accommodate hastily constructed wooden huts. Hut 3, Hut 6, Hut 8. Each one housed a different section of what would become the most consequential intelligence operation in modern warfare. Inside these anonymous buildings, some of the greatest minds in Britain gathered to face an enemy that seemed at first utterly unbeatable. The enemy was Enigma. The Enigma machine looked deceptively simple. Roughly the size of a typewriter, it resembled something a clerk might use to encode business correspondence. But this mechanical cipher device, perfected by German engineers, created an astronomical number of possible encryption combinations. German military commanders believed it was mathematically impossible to break. They transmitted their most sensitive orders, troop movements, U-boat positions, and invasion plans through Enigma encrypted messages, confident that British intelligence would capture only meaningless gibberish. They were partially right. When Mavis first saw the intercepted German transmissions, they looked like random sequences of letters that made no linguistic sense whatsoever. QWTP ZLK, JMNA, SDRF, page after page of alphabet soup that could mean anything or nothing. German submarines were hunting British merchant ships into extinction in the Atlantic. The Royal Air Force was being hammered in the skies over Britain. And all the while, German commanders chatted freely over their radio networks, protected by mathematics. Mavis was assigned to Dillon Knox's research section. Alfred Dillon Knox was a classic scholar turned cryptanalyst, a middle-aged eccentric who sometimes worked in his bath and often forgot to eat. He had been breaking codes since the First World War, but Enigma represented a challenge of an entirely different magnitude. Knox assembled a small team of young women, most barely out of university, because he believed fresh minds, unburdened by conventional thinking, might see patterns that experienced cryptanalysts missed. This detail is confirmed in a wartime report from The Guardian documenting the unconventional recruitment methods that brought civilians into Britons. Most classified intelligence work, the team worked in Cottage 3, a small building away from the main huts. Their specific target was the Enigma variant used by the Abwehr, German military intelligence. While other sections at Bletchley focused on naval and army communications, Knox's group pursued the spies, the intelligence officers, the shadow warriors who coordinated espionage across occupied Europe and neutral countries. The work was mentally exhausting. Mavis and her colleagues stared at letter sequences for hours, searching for the tiniest irregularities that might indicate a weakness in the encryption. The Enigma machine settings changed daily at midnight. Every 24 hours, the puzzle reset completely. Oh, what you learned today might be useless tomorrow. The frustration could be maddening. Some analysts suffered nervous breakdowns. Others simply walked away. But Mavis possessed something beyond mathematical aptitude. She had intuition, an almost artistic sense of how language worked beneath the mechanics of encryption. She understood that German operators, despite their training, were human beings who made human mistakes. They used girlfriends' names as code settings. They encrypted the same phrase at the beginning of messages. They got lazy when they thought no one was listening. On December the 8th, 1941, everything changed. The previous day, Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor. America was finally entering the war, but the news from every front remained catastrophic. German forces were hammering toward Moscow. Rommel's Afrika Korps was tearing through North Africa. U-boats were sinking cargo ships faster than British shipyards could replace them. The war could still be lost, completely and irreversibly. That cold December morning, Mavis was working through a batch of intercepted Abwehr messages when something caught her attention. A sequence that repeated across multiple transmissions. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking carefully. But Mavis had been staring at these patterns for months, and her instincts screamed that this was significant. She approached Knox with her theory. The repetition suggested a common word or phrase that German intelligence officers were using frequently. If she could identify what that word was, and if she could determine how it had been encrypted, she might be able to reverse engineer the Enigma settings for that entire day. It was a long shot, the kind of cryptanalytic gamble that usually led nowhere. Knox authorized her to pursue it. Mavis worked through the night. She tested dozens of common German words against the encrypted sequences. Nothing fit. She tried military terminology, geographic locations, dates, names. Still nothing. The cottage grew cold as the December darkness deepened. Her eyes burned from strain. Most people would have given up and waited for fresh intercepts the next day. But Mavis kept pushing. Just before dawn, she tried a phrase that suddenly made the entire puzzle collapse into clarity. The Abwehr operators had been encrypting the same bureaucratic greeting at the start of multiple messages. Once she identified that phrase, the encryption settings revealed themselves like a lock clicking open. Within hours, Knox's team had broken the Abwehr Enigma for that day. The intelligence haul was staggering. German spy networks across Spain, Portugal, and Turkey suddenly became visible. British counterintelligence could see exactly where German agents were operating, what information they were gathering, which local officials they had corrupted. More importantly, Bletchley could now read the intelligence reports these spies were sending back to Berlin, revealing what Germany knew, and, just as crucially, what Germany didn't know about Allied capabilities and intentions. Over the following months, Mavis and her colleagues systematically dismantled German intelligence operations across neutral Europe. They identified and turned double agents. They fed disinformation that German commanders believed completely. When the Allies eventually launched the D-Day invasion in June of 1944, German intelligence was so thoroughly compromised that Hitler received wildly inaccurate reports about where and when the attack would occur. But perhaps Mavis Batey's most critical breakthrough came in March of 1941. Before America had entered the war, when Britain was still fighting essentially alone, she cracked a series of Abwehr messages that revealed detailed Italian naval movements in the Mediterranean. The intelligence reached Admiral Andrew Cunningham, commander of the British Mediterranean Fleet, just in time. Cunningham's ships intercepted the Italian fleet off Cape Matapan on the night of March the 28th. The Italians had no idea the British were coming. The battle was devastatingly one-sided. British battleships and cruisers tore through the Italian formation in darkness, guided by intelligence so precise that Cunningham knew the enemy's exact position, course, and speed. 3 Italian heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers were sent to the bottom of the Mediterranean. More than 2,000 Italian sailors died. Britain lost a single aircraft. The Battle of Cape Matapan fundamentally shifted the balance of naval power in the Mediterranean. It secured British supply lines to Egypt and ensured that German and Italian forces in North Africa would struggle for fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. Historians now recognize it as one of the decisive naval engagements of the war. And it happened because a teenage girl with a gift for patterns spotted something that everyone else had missed. Mavis never spoke of her work. After the war ended in 1945, she returned to civilian life, married mathematician Keith Batey, whom she had met at Bletchley, and raised 3 children. When friends asked what she had done during the war, she smiled and said she had worked in an office. The Official Secrets Act held firm for decades. Veterans of Bletchley Park went to their graves without ever telling their families what they had accomplished. It was not until the 1970s that the British government began to acknowledge that Bletchley Park had existed. Even then, details emerged slowly, reluctantly, through official histories written with deliberate vagueness. The full scope of the code-breaking triumph was not publicly known until the 1990s. By then, Mavis Batey was in her 70s. When historians finally came calling, she was modest, almost to the point of deflection. She insisted she had simply been doing her duty, that many people had contributed, that she was no more important than anyone else in those cramped wooden huts. But the records told a different story. Her breakthroughs had saved thousands of lives, protected vital shipping routes, and helped turn the tide of the entire Mediterranean campaign. She died in November of 2013 at the age of 92. By then, she had finally been recognized with honors that could never fully capture what she had achieved. A young woman barely out of her teenage years had helped outsmart the most sophisticated military intelligence apparatus ever created up to that point. She had done it not with guns or bombs, but with patience, intuition, and an extraordinary mind that saw patterns where others saw only chaos. The wooden huts at Bletchley Park still stand, preserved now as a museum. Visitors walk through the rooms where the Enigma War was fought and won. They see the mechanical bombs, the early computing machines that helped automate the code-breaking process. They read the names of the men and women who worked in absolute secrecy to defeat an enemy that came terrifyingly, close to conquering all of Europe. But most visitors will never fully grasp what it meant to be 17 years old, and to know that your calculations might determine whether convoys reached Britain safely or sank beneath the Atlantic waves. They cannot feel the weight of secrets that could never be shared, the exhaustion of mental combat that left no visible scars, the strange isolation of fighting a war that you could never admit you were fighting. The story remained buried for 50 years because that was the price of victory. The codebreakers of Bletchley Park, Mavis Batey among them, understood that their greatest weapon was German confidence. As long as the enemy believed Enigma was unbreakable, they would continue to trust it with their most sensitive communications. Revealing the truth, even after victory, might compromise future intelligence operations or endanger techniques still in use. So they stayed silent. The teenager who outsmarted the Nazis went back to being a wife, a mother, a scholar of garden history. She lived an ordinary life shadowed by extraordinary secrets. And when the silence was finally broken decades later, the world learned that some of its greatest heroes had been hiding in plain sight all along. Their victories invisible, their sacrifices unrecognized, their courage expressed not through battlefield heroics, but through the quiet, relentless determination to solve impossible puzzles while the world burned around them.